These are the best places to go on your honeymoon if you hate your sanity. This is Darkness Prevails, the place to share your true scary stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Don't you hate moving? Packing up all your stuff and taking it to a place you are hardly familiar with, then breaking your back to move in all your heavy furniture. Moving is a pain already, but what are you going to do when you find out your new home is haunted? Looks like it's time for another move. Before I jump into the stories, remember, you can send your true stories to me with the links in the description. Plus, you can buy our amazingly cool merch, like this, at morbidmonsters.com. And lastly, if you want to support this channel for free, click the link in my pinned comment and download some of those free games. Now, here are the first 5 comments from my previous video. Soggy Baguette says, Ooga Booga. I'm more focused on that hyper-realistic Pepe, to be honest. Really freaks me out. Avery says, your videos are seriously my religion. Maybe I should come up with some commandments for you guys to follow. Thou shalt send me your Goatman stories. Alex Lopez stops by with a Hey Darkness. How you doing, Alex? Chloe Hreike says, OMG, hi yeet, love you. Chloe, is that really your last name? How do you pronounce that? Also, thank you. And AEM is here with, have you heard of Camp Camp? Also, it's rainy here, so perfect timing. It doesn't sound like a show I'd watch. Also, if I could live in a place where it rained every day, I'd live there. Rain is the best. Now, without further ado, let's move into these haunted houses. Number 1. A Haunting in the Country. Submitted by Nikki M. I've always been a strong believer in the paranormal, ever since I was a young child. I have childhood stories that I hope to share sometime, but for now, I'd like to talk about what happened to me about 10 years ago. I've never been more afraid than that time in my life. Well, it was the summer of 2007. My husband, daughter, and I had to move from where we were living to a trailer in a very rural community, away from my hometown where I'd grown up. To give you an idea of the area, it was surrounded by forest. Our trailer was right next to the only main road. Behind us was a cow field, and 4 other trailers in a line about half a mile away from us. It was a very nice location, and on the inside it was perfect, especially since we had a 7-year-old. But I always had a strange feeling, like something was always lurking just behind me. I did my best to ignore it. Maybe it was something from the stress of moving away from my hometown to a brand new area I wasn't familiar with. That can really bring on a lot of weird emotions. The activity was very slow and small at the start. I would hear small banging and knocking on the walls, and there would be knocking on the front door glass, and yet no one would be there. We did have 3 cats, so I figured it was them being a little playful. Sometimes I would think the trailer was just settling, and then other times it was my daughter, Max, making some of the noises. But she would always say she wasn't. So for a long time I wasn't sure, but I was certain that something logical was making the noises. I believed in the paranormal, but it was more of a hobby, or an interest, not something that would jump into my mind as an explanation. But then, one night, everything changed. My husband Charlie worked evenings at a restaurant 60 miles away, and he didn't get off until late, anywhere from 2 to 4 in the morning. I had a futon in our living room where I was sitting watching a movie. My daughter was asleep in her room, and all 3 of our cats were asleep in various spots around the living room. It was about 2 in the morning as I was waiting on Charlie to come home. I had the lights off because I was watching a scary movie, as I've always loved watching them in the dark. It really sets the mood. Suddenly, I felt a chill come over me, which I thought was our air conditioner blowing in from the kitchen. But then I realized I had turned it off several hours ago. Naturally, I'm a very cold person. Before I decided to shake it off as nothing, I very clearly felt 3 fingers run through the left side of my hair above my ear. I jumped up and screamed, looking behind me, and there was no one there. My body was covered in goosebumps. I began to run my fingers through my hair, assuming that there was probably a bug in there or a spider, but my hair was fine. Besides, I knew those were fingers running through my hair. I recognized the sensation, something my husband often did. There was no mistaking it. I shuddered, and that night I barely slept at all. The next day, the memory was fresh on my mind, so I called up a few of my friends to tell them what I'd experienced. My friend Jay said she would come over, and maybe we could do an EVP experiment, try to get some creepy audio recorded. She thought that if it was a spirit, maybe it was trying to communicate. So she came over with my other friend, M, and they brought with them a digital recorder and a Ouija board. Charlie went to work as usual. At about 9 p.m., I put Max to bed. We sat around talking girl talk for a bit, and I had told the girls about the small occurrences, like the knocking on the walls and windows, especially on the front door. So around 3 in the morning, we decided to get started. We turned out the lights, lit 3 candles, and placed our fingers on the planchette. Then we turned on the recorder. The house was very quiet. Starting with Jay, we began to ask questions. Jay asked, "Is anyone here?" The planchette didn't respond or move, but we continued to ask simple questions, moving around in a circle, taking turns. We asked things like, "Where are you? How did you pass?" After the session, we all sat there eager to see if we had captured anything on tape. There weren't any responses to the first few questions when we played it back. But when we heard Jay ask, "Where are you?" there was something audible in the recording, a childlike voice coming through, saying, "Outside." The hairs on the back of my neck began to raise up. Next thing we know, we heard M ask, "How did you pass?" on the recording, and we hear a faint voice of a woman crying, "So cold." At this point on the tape, we were asking any present entity if they were drawn to someone or something here, and in the speaker, you could just barely hear something beyond the audio, a whisper saying, "Nikki," which is my name. To this day, I still get chills when I think of that voice speaking my name. At that exact moment, it felt as if a very strong force pushed down on my shoulders, like hands pushing me to the floor. I felt extremely sick, and I stopped the tape immediately. Jay said a blessing, but it didn't really relieve the pressure I suddenly felt. Charlie ended up coming home, and the girls decided to go to bed. Charlie and I laid down, and he fell right to sleep, but I had this extreme wave of fear still over me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel someone watching me closely. I opened my eyes quickly, and to my horror, I saw that I wasn't alone in the room, and I'm not talking about Charlie. There was a shadowy figure. It was dark, masculine in shape, and it was cast onto the ceiling directly above me. I've never suffered from sleep paralysis, and as soon as I opened my eyes, it vanished, but it stayed just long enough for me to see it. I sat straight up, my chest feeling heavy and tight, to where I was having trouble breathing. I was shaking and trying to wake Charlie up to tell him what I saw, but he was just too out of it. I sat there in my bed, curled up in a ball until the dawn came. Then I could finally close my eyes and sleep. From then on, after that night, everything was different out there. I always felt cold, even though temperatures reached 80 degrees. The shower, other than the bed, was the scariest place in the house. When I would go to take a shower, I always had my water very hot, but still every time I'd undress and get in, there was that same familiar cold swirl around my body. I would get chills all over. At one point, I could even see my breath, it was so cold in that shower. I went from showering once a day to once a week because I was so scared and just couldn't take it. Every day was the same. I'd have enormous pressure on my shoulders, panic attacks out of nowhere. I'd have a lot of difficulty breathing, and that feeling at night, that dang feeling, whatever was haunting me, loved to see me in pain. Even in my waking hours, I would see that shadow on the ceiling, making sure I would see him for just a split second. I don't know if it was because we opened up a doorway when we used the Ouija board that night, but I always think back and wished we had left it alone. But part of me thinks that it would have escalated even still, but maybe it would have been slower without the board. I don't think the board was the problem entirely. I think it's this trailer. I think it's this place we live in. Later on, in September of that same year, I was able to move back to my hometown. I was terrified that whatever had a hold of me in the country would follow me. When I got back home, I looked up a multitude of ways to cast away negative entities, but simply moving away from that place, I haven't felt the strange presence again. To this day, I won't forget that voice. I won't forget the shadows on the ceiling. I think I'm stronger as a person for the experience, but for the life of me, I'll never want to go back. Number 2. Who are these people? Submitted by a journal entry. I've lived in the same house all my life, and I've seen some pretty weird things there. But the worst happened in December of 2014. At the time, my room was being remodeled, so I slept on an air mattress in the living room. I was sitting on it one night, and my mom was in the kitchen cooking dinner. I looked back as I was facing the TV away from the hallway, and I saw something dart into my room at the end of the hallway. And that's when my mom asked if I had just walked down the hallway, so she had seen it as well. I had the tendency to skip around due to my ADHD, but I replied to her, "No, I saw it too." I could hear my mom rolling her eyes with her reply, "Don't lie to me, I saw you skipping around." She is not a believer in the paranormal, and she's prone to be onto my games, but this was no game of mine. After seeing that thing in the hallway, things just got weirder. We began to hear things like a little girl giggling in the halls, and all of a sudden, things we would place would get misplaced. They would appear in places we hadn't left them. I even took note of this once, leaving a certain toy on the counter when I was home alone, taking note of it, then coming back 5 minutes later, only to see that it was gone. I later found that same toy in the fridge, which makes absolutely no sense. Later on in February of 2015, I would have the creepiest experience of my entire life. By then, I was still sleeping on the air mattress, and I woke up in the middle of the night. My air mattress was in the corner under the TV, and I could see into the kitchen from there, as well as half of the hallway. Anyway, I set up to go to the bathroom, when I rubbed my eyes to get the sleep out of them, then grabbed my glasses from next to me. I looked into the hallway, as I naturally would to go in there. But just before the hallway, sitting at the sofa in front of me, there was very clearly someone sitting there. The solid shape of a man. He was reading a book. I blinked a couple of times to be sure I wasn't sleeping still. When I kid you not, the man looked up at me and said,
"I'm sorry. Did I wake you?"
I watched him close the book, then he placed it on the table in front of him. He walked down the hallway out of my view, and I heard the creak of my bedroom door. I know it was mine, because mine is the only door in the house that creaks like that. Because it's the only door in the place that hadn't been replaced yet. I curled up into the corner and covered myself with a blanket, and I cried and stayed up all night. I didn't need to use the bathroom, not until the daylight came. I struggled to hold it until then. When I finally had the courage to get up in the morning, there was still a book on the table. It was one of my own, something I'd been reading, except now my bookmark was on a different page. I never saw anything like that again, not until much later. For the time being, I would just hear someone's name being called, laughter in an empty house, and knocking at the front door every other night. It was very difficult to get anything done when you're too busy being scared of the things you can't explain. In the summer of 2016, I was left home alone. My mom had to run to the store, and my brother was fast asleep while my dad was at work. So it was just me sitting on the couch and watching TV. I got up and passed the hallway, and I hate that hallway nowadays. Ever since seeing that figure running into my room, I've always seen something in that hallway when I pass it. A person pointing to my room, standing like a shadow at the end of the hallway. I know it's there. It's in the corner of my vision. Anyway, as I passed the hallway, as I always did, I saw someone there. Someone taller than me. I quickly went to the kitchen and got my drink out of the fridge, then walked back again hesitantly. Out of the corner of my eye, it was clear as day. They were still there. A person standing over me. I ignored it, and I sat back on the couch. But as I did so, I glanced back over to the hallway, only to see something that froze me with fear. It was the pale face of a little girl. She smiled with decaying teeth. She giggled at me, and she just stood there and kept watching me for the longest time. I tried to keep watching TV, but all I could do was cry in silence, always seeing her face from my peripherals. Suddenly, my mom was home and she opened the door. As soon as that door opened, I heard giggling again going down the hallway, and when I turned towards it, the girl's face was gone. After that, I stayed very close to my mother for the rest of the evening. Later that year, they finally finished renovating my room, and I was able to move back in. And I thought that would make the activity stop, or at least I wouldn't have to be a part of it anymore. But the same night I moved back in, trying to sleep, I heard a knock at my door, and a girl's voice calling my name. I tried to ignore it, covering my face in the blanket, but then the knock came again. But in the very same tone of voice and inflection, another voice called. This time, it was my dad's. But the strange part is, my dad doesn't giggle like a girl. Whatever it was in the hallway that haunted this place, it was impersonating my dad's voice, either to trick me or to torment me. I asked my father about it in the morning, and of course he said he hadn't been awake at that time. I needed answers, so I asked my dad after that if there were any people who lived here before us, people who may have passed on in this very house. But apparently the answer was no. He said as far as he was concerned, the only passing in this house was from an elderly woman who had a heart attack, but that was it. That didn't explain all the things I was seeing, the little girl, the shadowy figure of a man, the shadow that darted into my room. I was left there without any answers, left there to wonder, who are these people? I'm scared of my own home. Number 3. The Red Rooms. Submitted by Enoch Ian Nerd. This happened from when I was 7 until I was 9. Up until age 7, I had lived with my father, and he had been homeless. We lived in his truck, in motels and shelters and churches off and on. He was a single father, basically getting screwed by life. But just as I turned 7, he finally got a handle on things, and we moved into a house. I was beyond excited to finally live in a home. I couldn't even imagine having my own room, and everything was finally going to be better. My dad had bought the house for a good deal, and we hadn't seen it until the day we moved in, which I know now sounds a little sketchy. It was a 2-story home with a huge backyard, and that excited me even more. I immediately started planning for all the animal companions this home could hold. What kind of pets would I have? How many pets could I get away with? When I stepped in the front door, I suddenly felt a cold chill, and I was immediately uncomfortable. But I ignored it because I was too excited to explore our new home. The first thing I wanted to do was claim my bedroom. I shot upstairs, taking everything in along the way. This stairway was straight for about 4 steps. Then there was a landing and the stairs turned 180 degrees and go up. But you can't see that part because it's all boxed in by the walls. Now, once I got to the top of the stairs, my stomach seemed to twist and turn, and my eyes began to water. Now, living between trucks and motels, I've seen all kinds of things, and I wasn't the kind of kid that was easily scared. Not with what I've been through. So when I got to the top of the stairs, and I was suddenly overwhelmed with fear, it was strange. When I arrived at the top, I saw that the previous occupants had apparently painted the walls, floor, and ceiling red, and there were shapes on the walls that stood out, spray painted in black. Shapes I would later learn were pentagrams. When my father got upstairs behind me, he saw everything and looked horrified. He took me downstairs. My dad decided that, in the time being, we would just live in the lower story of the house. Besides, the upper floor didn't even have electric wiring. The house was old and needed plenty of work, hence why my dad got it so cheap. So my dad put plastic sheets around the doorway to the stairs, and he stapled it all the way around, completely sealing the stairs off. His excuse was that we could save on heating that way. I picked a bedroom downstairs, and for the first week things weren't bad. I couldn't sleep well though because of noises coming from upstairs, but other than that things were going okay, just not as good as I expected them to be. Around the second week, I started waking up in weird spots, and when I say weird I mean I woke up on my dresser at one point. I would often see shadowy figures in the doorway to my bathroom. I would hear noises. I always felt watched, and my dad always seemed on edge when he didn't realize I was watching. There was an extremely ominous feeling to that house. Then there came a time when I woke up on the floor, upstairs, surrounded by the black pentagrams and red walls. I don't know how long I'd been up there, or how I got up there, but I knew I needed to get downstairs. But when I tried to will myself to move, I couldn't. I was too scared that all I could do was quietly cry, trying to build my courage to finally stand up. As I lay there on the red floor, I heard noises like something was moving around behind me, odd clicks and scraping sounds. I don't know what finally willed me to move, but I did. I finally got up, and I ran downstairs so fast, I almost tumbled down the steps. I didn't even see the plastic sheets and instead ran into them. I couldn't escape. I struggled, trying to find a flap where I could get through the plastic, but I ended up ripping it in my panic, right in the center, just to get away. When my dad woke up in the morning, he yelled at me for destroying the plastic. I checked all the way around the door frame where it had been stapled, and none of it was undone. To this very day, I haven't been able to figure out how I got upstairs. How could anyone get upstairs without messing with the plastic? That thought eats at me. The 2 years I spent in that nightmare home, it was dreadful. My dad had never been the type to tell me it was my imagination or anything. He would always investigate anything I asked, and he would help me figure out an actual explanation, or he would straight up say I can see things he can't. But that was probably his way of comforting me, making me feel confident about our nightmare situation. He was a very supportive father, and he didn't make me feel crazy. But in this house, my dad was suddenly less patient, less caring. Something was eating away at him day by day. I began to wonder, what happened in that house? Something awful was in there with us, and we were in its dark, angry clutches. As an adult now, I never did figure out what happened there, and my dad has passed on. I wish I had asked him, as an adult myself, what was really going on in that strange house, and what was up with those weird red rooms. And number 4, I think a ghost wanted my family gone. Submitted by Paranormal Ghost 66. A few years ago, my family and I moved into an old brick house in a small town in Southwest Virginia. We lived there for a month before strange things began to happen. I was in my room watching YouTube videos and talking to my friends on the phone. I thought that I was the only one awake, so I was surprised when I heard laughter coming from down the hallway. I brushed it off because I thought that it may have been my sister. But a few minutes later, a large crash sounded from the kitchen. I exited my room and crept through the dark hallway towards the kitchen. I flipped on the light, and I was shocked at the sight before me. All of the pans had been removed from the cabinets and placed in a stack in the middle of the room. Again, I thought it was my sister playing a prank. She was trying to get her YouTube channel off the ground, so I didn't put it past her. I picked all of the pans up and returned them to their places in the cabinets. I went back to my room and flipped the light off, and I'd slowly began to fall asleep when a sudden tapping sound filled my room. It sounded like someone was tapping on the window across the room from my bed. I remember holding my breath, and I was frozen in place. I refused to turn around. I refused to look into that window for fear of what I might see. It was probably just the wind or a branch, I told myself. After I was finally convinced it was nothing, I drifted off to sleep. About a week later, my siblings and I were playing a game of hide and seek in the woods behind my house. Since I was the oldest, I had to be the seeker. When I called time, I began to look for my siblings. While I was walking towards a large tree, I suddenly felt something fly past me. I turned around, but tripped over something that had been sticking out of the ground. It was an old, odd statue. It resembled an ugly gargoyle. The top of it had busted from the impact of my shoe. I picked it up and carried it with me as I continued to search for my siblings. While walking, I discovered 4 more of these odd gargoyle statues. I carried them all in my arms while I continued to look for the other kids. After I found them, we all went back to the house, and I placed the total of 5 gargoyle statues on the back deck. I think we were all confused as to what they were and why they were here, and my parents didn't really have an answer. Later that night, I was in the basement when a scream came from upstairs. My youngest brother had been in the kitchen and had somehow turned on a hot plate by himself. He was very curious and decided to place his hand on it, and and he got a really bad burn. My parents treated his burns, and then we went to bed. The next day, I went out to the back deck to get those weird statues so that I could try to do some research on them. But I noticed the one that I had accidentally broken the day before had disappeared. I was pretty spooked about it, and things only got creepier. There were even louder sounds in the middle of the night. It sounded like laughter throughout the house when no one was supposed to be awake, and each one of us always felt stressed. In a matter of weeks, the statues began to disappear one by one. Each time one disappeared, it was followed by an unfortunate event. When there were 2 statues left, I began to believe that they were cursed, and I think my family believed the same. A month after that, we decided to move to another county, and by then all of those statues were gone. Thankfully, no more paranormal activity happened to my family, but ever since then, I've been very scared of any type of gothic-looking statue. Number 5. House by the Cemetery. Submitted by Marco is Love. This happened a year ago. My best friend Bella and I, along with her little sister and brother, went on a trip to their grandparents' house where we spent the night. During the day, the place wasn't so scary. Heading into the backyard, I was shocked to see that their backyard was right next to a cemetery, but I was more fascinated at the time. Her grandpa helped us set up an old tent they used for camping. We both thought it was going to be pretty chill camping out there. When we were camping that night, watching Jaws in the tent, we both decided to use the swing set in the backyard. We were talking about random things like school, relationships, and video games. As I was listening to Bella speak, I saw something in the nearby cemetery that caught my eyes. My head drifted towards it, and my eyes were wide when I saw it. There was a silhouette. It looked to be a person looking in our direction, and when it saw that I saw, it hunkered down, as if trying to hide. But then I saw something disturbing about the figure. A normal person doesn't have horns. Bella must have seen the scared look on my face as she asked me, "What are you looking at?" I didn't take my eyes off of the thing for a second. "Do you see that?" I replied. Bella turned, and once she made out the figure that clearly had horns, she stumbled out of the swing trying to make it back to the tent. I followed suit. Within the sleeping bags, we were both shaking. We listened to every little noise outside, but there was nothing. I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe the creature we saw wouldn't come any closer. I began to play some music on my phone to try and drown out the fear, but the moment I played anything, the fence rattled, like something was climbing over it. Shortly, we heard a bull-like huff sound, and then thudding, rapid thudding like something was running at us. I ran out of the tent, into the night air, only to see that there was nothing around us. We were alone, and the cemetery was quiet. We quickly grabbed our things and went back inside. We told everyone what happened that night. Oddly enough, her grandparents weren't surprised. They said that weird things happen around this house thanks to that cemetery. And they said, quote for quote, "Horns or no horns, I wouldn't be surprised." So you want to live with me, huh? Well, it's just $200 a month. Be sure to pick up after yourself, and don't bother me when I'm recording. Oh, and there's like 1,000 ghosts that breathe down your neck and pull your hair when you sleep. Sound good? Sweet. Yeah, seriously, I wouldn't want to live in a haunted house. Some of you might think differently. I mean, yeah, being scared is fun. Watching a scary movie is great. But being scared every moment of your life, and being scared in your very own home every day, that's not something you should wish for. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Remember to send me your stories with the links in the description. and check out my merch store at morbidmonsters.com for some amazing gear and to support this channel. If you don't have any money and you want to support me, download and play the games in my comment or the link in the description. And also, a huge thanks goes out to my newest patrons. They are Melissa Shihai and Ragnar Cameron. Thank you both so much for doing what you can to support this channel. Every little extra counts. As always, to anyone still listening, stay safe out there and stay creepy.